The Supreme Court has just delivered a major decision involving home equity. A family in Michigan lost their property after a county sold their home for $76,000. At first glance, someone might assume the property was abandoned, damaged, or nearly worthless. But that was not the case. The county's own assessment records valued the exact same home at $194,400. The property was sold for only 39 cents on the dollar because of a property tax issue involving just $2,240. A tax bill the family had already challenged, and they had actually won that legal fight. The buyer who purchased the home at the auction for $76,000 later sold the same property only weeks afterward and for $195,000. The value was confirmed. It was the same house, no major repairs were made, no improvements changed the property. The buyer simply found someone willing to pay six figures for the home and completed the sale. This case reached the United States Supreme Court. The justices reviewed the entire matter and issued their decision. The ruling was unanimous, 9-0, and the outcome was devastating for the homeowners. But the decision was not only about one Michigan family. It established a broader rule about how home equity is treated when property is taken for unpaid taxes. For many homeowners, there has always been an assumption. If you followed the rules, paid your taxes, paid off your mortgage, and did everything expected of a responsible homeowner, then the property was truly yours. Once the mortgage was gone, the belief was that nobody could simply take the value you had built. The Pong family believed they had done everything correctly. They paid what they owed. They challenged a tax bill they believed was incorrect, and they won that case in court. They owned their home outright. But the county disagreed with the situation, and the dispute eventually reached the Supreme Court. The court ruled in favor of the county. The court's explanation was straightforward. When the government takes a home because of unpaid taxes and sells that property, the owner is entitled to receive the remaining money, known as the surplus. That issue had already been addressed by the court in 2023. The principle was simple: collect what is owed and return whatever remains. If someone pays $5 for an item that costs $2, they receive $3 back. The question in this case was different and more complicated. What exactly determines the remaining amount? Should it be based on the true market value of the home, or should it be based on whatever price the property receives at a public auction? The Supreme Court chose the auction price. Justice Alito wrote the opinion. According to his explanation, the surplus return to the homeowner is limited to the actual amount generated from the sale. Nothing less and nothing more. That means if a $200,000 home is sold at a county auction for $80,000, the compensation calculation is based on the $80,000 sale price, not the original $200,000 value. Even if the person who bought the property at auction immediately turns around and sells the home for $200,000 the next day, that additional $120,000 is not included for the original owner. Some people may say this is simply the result of failing to pay a property tax bill. But the situation is more complicated, and Justice Clarence Thomas raised additional concerns about the decision. Imagine a different example. Suppose someone owes a city $200 because of a parking ticket. One Saturday morning, officials enter the person's garage, remove a $30,000 Camry, place it up for sale, and sell it to the first buyer who arrives at 9 a.m. for only $8,000. They then give the owner a check for $7,800, explaining that the vehicle sale covered the debt because the $8,000 payment was reduced by the $200 parking ticket. The question remains whether that process truly reflects the value that was taken. In that parking ticket example, the owner loses enormous value because the government takes an expensive asset, sells it cheaply, and then says the process was acceptable because the required steps were followed. Now replace that vehicle with a house. That is the practical effect of the Supreme Court's decision. The county had two different valuations for the same property. When it was time to calculate taxes, the home was valued at $194,400. But when it came time to return money to the family after the sale, the value was treated as only $76,000. The number changed depending on the situation. The county used the figure that benefited its position. The question many people asked was why the nation's highest court would approve this approach. The answer came directly from the opinion. Justice Alito explained the reasoning behind the decision. He said that if counties were required to compensate homeowners based on the actual value of their properties, many tax sales would result in a financial loss for the government. In other words, returning the true value of the home could cost the county money. The decision focused on avoiding that outcome. And remember, the buyer who purchased the Michigan property for $76,000 and later sold it for $195,000. The difference between those two amounts had previously existed in an uncertain legal area. Courts could have viewed that gain differently, but after this ruling, the Supreme Court unanimously accepted that outcome under the law. The person who bought the property kept the difference created by the resale. Now, the important question is not only what happened in this case, The bigger issue is what happens next for homeowners. Because if the auction amount determines the maximum money returned to the former owner, then the most important protection is preventing the property from ever reaching that auction stage. The process begins with one thing: a property tax bill that remains unpaid long enough to become delinquent. That unpaid tax creates the opening. From there comes the possibility of foreclosure, auction, a lower sale price, and a later resale. Everything begins with one unpaid tax obligation. Now comes the part that may seem surprising. Someone who has completely paid off their mortgage might believe they are in the safest position. They may think, I own my home outright. Nobody has a claim against it. But according to this argument, those homeowners may actually face a unique risk. When a mortgage existed, there was another party closely monitoring the property. The mortgage company had a strong reason to make sure property taxes were paid. Loan servicers commonly handled tax payments through escrow accounts, paying those bills automatically. The bank watched the account carefully because its money was invested in the property. They had a financial interest in preventing a tax issue from becoming a foreclosure problem. But after the mortgage was fully paid, that additional layer of protection disappeared. The safety net may disappear after the mortgage is gone. The person who was watching the account is no longer there. Now it is only you, your memory, and the notices that arrive in your mailbox. This family shows what can happen when one important letter goes unnoticed during the wrong period of time.